The West is built on slavery. This is something that we have to acknowledge. Not only the slavery of other people from other countries, but the enslavement of ourselves. This is key to understand the Western story. It's key to understand how empire works. We've gone about this in two different ways. The left has gone out and said slavery was a big mistake and we shouldn't have done it because it was immoral. The right come out and say, well, slavery was a mistake because we've become more diverse. We've actually lost our essence for empire. So there's this debate between both sides over the role of slavery. But what we must understand is that the first world operates on slavery and still does. In many ways, the third world, despite it being very barbaric, is actually more human. If you go to India, you see people that don't have money, right? That have to go out and get their food, have to beg, have to fight for money. They don't have any hygiene standards. They operate like a human really would, which is an animal. Here in the West, we pretend like we're not animals, and we fuel our animal nature through systems like slavery, because we believe that slavery is a more moral standard compared to living as barbaric human beings. Capital, ka, meaning the soul in ancient Egyptian, was the essence of a human being. When you take the essence of a human being and you crucify it, and you take value itself, which should be in the heart, but you take it out and you say, okay, we're going to make capital, right? We're going to make money, right? Not amen, which is in the heart, which is God, which is inside, but a many, right? And we say, this is a money. It's a play on words, right? And the way in which we understand capitalism, the way we understand our Western way of thinking, all of our languages, are based on a religious language, a divine language that's used to control other human beings, right? We operate through systems of control. So I want to phrase to you a situation which describes the free man. Then I'm going to tell you about how you live and how you're not free. People went to the United States and the Americas to gain independence, to have a free life, to be free from kings. Now, what is freedom? Freedom is, there's a piece of land over there, and I'm going to take it, and I'm going to live on it, and I'm going to build a house. How am I going to build a house? I have no money. I don't need money. I'm going to use the trees. I need water. I go to a river, right? I am going to live in harmony with nature, and I'm going to live as an animal, right? I'm going to build my little hut, and I'm going to raise a family. Now, if you did need money, you needed it for things like buying a Bible, or buying a sword, or buying a gun, or buying a horse. And for those things, you go to a village, or you go to a city and a town, and you do some work in exchange for a small amount of gold, right? Or a metal, precious metal, in a coin. And that this was actually worth something. And in exchange for that, for your hard labor, working in the fields, working for a lord, whatever it is, you gain a little bit of capital, and then you can buy your Bible, you buy your horse, you buy whatever you need. And then you go back to being a free man, right? You've worked for a little bit of time, you've slaved yourself, but out of the slavery, you get something that's truly of value. So that when you go back to your farm, you're able to invest that money, right, into your family. Then when you have kids and you start expanding, and again, all this expansion is done without money because you don't need money. You hunt, this for free. You take land, that's for free, right? You gain firewood, that's for free. And you expand and your kids have houses, right? And you make a little settlement. And then over time, civilization forms, which is what happened in the United States. It's what's happened everywhere, right? People go somewhere. But then over time, we take the family unit and extrapolate it into something bigger. So we say, okay, you have your mother, your father, your kids. Well, now you have a lord, right? Or a priest who you call father, who's like your meta father, right? And that father or that lord is going to rule over multiple settlements, multiple villages, and use weapons to enforce his rule. So then you have taxes, right? And you have the dominance of one man taking over many little settlements and telling them how to live, right? This is what you would call the establishment of a nation or a country. England is Angleland, which is based on the Angleland Peninsula. I think it's called the Jutland Peninsula of Denmark. So originally the Angles and the Anglo-Saxons were in Europe, mainland Europe, and living there. They went to England and made Angleland because it's the land of the Angles, right? Later they went and made New England in Maine and continued dominating and taking over. Fundamentally, it came from soil, land, race, and family. And this was the foundations of society. Stuff like countries and international groups came much, much later, right? And the country was really just a combination of multiple families. And in many ways, one ruling family which ruled the kingdom, which is where you get a king. So you have all these different lords that represent different communities. All the different lords add up with their power here, all the power adding up, aggregating it, which goes up to a king which is ruling over all the different lords. So then you get a kingdom and you get hierarchy and you get a nation, and then you get empiricism, where it's like we're going to go and make an empire and we're going to chop everything up and regulate everything. We're going to start dominating other cultures because we've been so successful, we're going to go out there and do things. But it reaches a state where the need for the state becomes so costly, right? You have to maintain a military, you have to maintain economic centers, people that are working for the state. And eventually the state takes a life of its own. And the family values, racial values, they don't have to be racial. I don't mean in this really like, black or white sense, but just, a group of people that have had sex for thousands of years, right? And have a community together who are genetically linked. This has to become regulated by a higher standard. And they say, okay, we're going to pay taxes now. Now, if you tell someone, okay, you're going to work for £1, right? They'd say, I'm not going to do that, right? Because that's just slavery. So what they do is they say, okay, well, would you be a slave for £10, right? Would you be a slave for £10? And people are like, okay, that sounds pretty good. It sounds like a good deal. So then people become slaves to the state. But then the tax man comes along and says, well, okay, you're getting £10 a week, let's say, but we're going to have to tax that. So actually we're going to take 40% of your revenue, right? So out of every £10 you get, we're going to take £4 of that back. So now you only have £6, right? But because we're limited with land and because you're using our resources and because you're part of this state as well, there's not an unlimited amount of fancy houses in the city. So you're going to have to pay a rent as well. So you have to pay a rent. So now they say, how much is rent? Well, that's another £4, right? So now you only have £2. Then they say, okay, well, in the modern era, we take your job and we put it over here and put you over here and force you to commute into the city, right? So then you're going to need transport. You need a car. That also costs money. So again, your amount decreases. You're going to have to pay for food because, well, we control all the food supplies. You can't go hunt and kill your own food anymore. Also, you've got chickens. We're not going to allow that. We're going to have regulations on your chickens, which has happened in the UK. Now it's very hard to even own chickens because we want you to come to us to buy the chickens, the grains, the supplies, and you're going to have to pay taxes, not only your government tax, but you're going to have to pay a tax on food because you're not allowed to farm your own food and we're going to regulate all the farms, right? So that £10 you're earning per week decreases until it becomes about £1 per week. So you're a slave. But then the joke goes even further. And the joke says, okay, well, there's actually this little thing called inflation. There's like an invisible extra tax, which turns that £1 even smaller. Then you have to buy clothes and you're going to have to buy all the things we tell you to buy, drugs, shitty clothing, Netflix subscriptions, right? Because you're suffering so much as a slave, having to work so much, but you have to spend that, otherwise you have no reason for living. And you've lost all happiness. You've been chopped off from God, right? The state chops people away from God and says, we are God. You come to us to pray. So again, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And the end of the joke, when you're earning basically 5 cents a week at this point, because all your other money is going back to the state and to the landowners and to the food suppliers and all these different things, that little bit that's left over, what we're going to do is we're not even going to pay you in gold anymore. We're going to pay you in these invisible credits. So even that little bit that you have, right, is going to be basically worth nothing unless you buy gold. But we're going to control all of the gold supplies as well. So it just ends up being the situation where we control everything, and you basically control nothing. And people got sick of this. They get sick of working for kings, sick of working in societies, sick of living this very anti-human lifestyle, and said, okay, fine, I'm going to get my family and I'm going to disappear to America. And I might be this barbaric person and my hygiene standards might go down. I might end up being quite a barbaric individual on the frontiers fighting Indians, but who cares? At least I'm free, right? And that's what's happened. But then over time, the same financial interests that were controlling Europe controls the United States, controls everywhere, because the system propagates and it can't help but propagate further and further and further. So now we have this thing called the First World. And in the First World, most people, the overwhelming majority, even people who are rich, are slaves, but they don't lose face, right? We do this nice, fancy, well, you're going to get a salary and then you pay your tax and you do these different things. There's this really funny thing. They could take your tax money before they pay you. The reason why they pay you and then you have to pay the tax, one, is to remind you who's boss, but two, so that the rich people can dodge taxes, right? That's the way the system works. If they took the taxes out before they gave you your salary, then there wouldn't be a chance for smart people to dodge the system, because the rich people want to take tremendous amounts of money, but then dodge the taxes later. So there's a scale where it's like poor, and then you get to this level where you can dodge taxes, and then you really become rich, because the only way to really become rich is to break the system, con the system, get in there nitty gritty and do something that might be considered corrupt. So that's why we live in a capitalist society. That's why we have a society in the First World where we're basically enslaved. And in return for our slavery, we get goods, products, and we buy those products and we become consumers. So we're no longer this free human being that can do whatever they want and has freedom within nature. We basically become this, ant in a nest. So we're no longer lions, we're no longer creators, we're no longer going out there and dominating. We just become part of the system. And our job in the system is to propagate the system further. And really, you can't work within a capitalistic system without propagating the capitalist system. So it just keeps propagating. And then you turn around to people and you say, okay, well, maybe capitalism has enslaved us. Maybe we do operate in terms of thinking in slavery. Maybe this is not good for us, right? And then you get called a Marxist, which you don't want to be a Marxist. So it reaches this stage where you can't even criticize capitalism, because the second you do, people assume you're a communist. There is a big difference between a communist state and a state such as the Americas, where it's like, hey, there's a ton of land, go out, claim it, live your life, be free. There's a big difference between those worldviews. And I think that the Americans in the United States have been conned into believing that capitalism is what built the United States. Capitalism is the result of the process. However, it is not the foundational principle the United States was founded upon. The United States and the Americas is founded on the principle of, I'm going to go to this land, I'm going to take what I want for me, and I'm going to live the way that I want, and I'm going to live by my own rules. And I will negotiate with my neighbors, I will negotiate with the communities, I will barter, I will go out and dominate, and other people might dominate me. Over time, this system inevitably leads to the same capitalist system that controls Europe. And that's why we're in a situation where, if anything, the United States is more capitalist, more kingship focused compared to the kings of Europe. The kings of Europe are now just symbolic. The real kings are people like Donald Trump. that have still legitimate feudalistic power. We are living in a techno-feudalist society, and the way in which you gain power up this system is to become a feudal lord. People like Bezos are feudal lords. They give a digital space, such as Amazon, which is like a false land, it's a digital land, and they say, okay, well, you can sell products on Amazon, but we're going to tax you within our marketplace. So Amazon takes a cut of all the transactions on the platform. So through subscriptions and through taxes if you're a seller on Amazon. So Amazon becomes this techno-feudalistic provider that takes taxes and cuts from serfdom, from people who are slaves working within the Amazon system. So all you have is the propagation of the system and the fulfillment of slaves underneath, but hold up the system. And the American ideal is, okay, well, you can go out and make your own company, right? And as long as we're a free marketplace, you won't get monopolies, right? Because as soon as there's a monopoly, the American dream is dead, because there's no unlimited free trade. You end up having to fall into these very strict feudalistic societies. But what was wrong with Europe in the first place? But fundamentally, Silicon Valley has become this. Silicon Valley has become a place where it's ran by techno-feudal lords. And if you don't get along with the people in Silicon Valley and you don't match their lifestyle, or in Hollywood, for instance, you're going to get kicked out. And you won't get there. I've worked with people in Silicon Valley, and I've been asked this question: who's your father? Who's your father? They ask me. I think that's completely irrelevant. But to people in Silicon Valley, it really matters who your father is, because they're working on the same principles of feudalism that we used to work with in Europe, but the United States tried to escape. And I said this yesterday on one of the spaces that I did, that people like Baron Trump inevitably become almost princes within the system, with Trump being like an emperor, and everyone's looking at Baron as the guy who's going to come up and take things over at some point. These things are very, very simple, but also very, very complicated. And it's always been the way that the man that just wants to live off the land, be free, whether he's a Native American or a European American, or some European guy, whatever it is, wherever you are, or some Arab that just wants to chill and practice his religion, if you're sitting on a bunch of oil, you're going to get screwed. If you're living in a place of limited space, you're going to get screwed. If you have any kind of resource whatsoever, somebody's going to try to take it from you. So war is the father of all things. Competition is the father of all things. And generally, human beings will propagate a capitalist system, a Soviet-style system, whichever kind of rules they wish, as long as they're fulfilling their will to power and competing against others to better their family and destroy others. So the core of reality ends up being this quite harsh, brutal fighting, whether it's a capitalist fighting for space, fighting for resources. It's a competition of who can rule and why they should rule. And generally, most people are prepared to become slaves. But what they want is a noble lord, a noble ruler, so that they work in Amazon, but they can look up to Bezos and say, you know what, I respect Bezos. This is not the case in many companies. And this My phone died. Yeah, so this is not the case in most situations. People are looking towards their boss and they're actually saying, you know what, this guy's not leading me in a positive direction. I don't feel that my community is heading in a good direction. And this is where you have a revolution. This is where people turn towards their leaders and they say, you know what, I think I could govern myself and my community and my family and my people better than you can govern me. And the media that you give us, the products that you give us, all the comfortable life you give us, you know what, that's no longer fulfilling to me anymore, because I see something greater that I can achieve. And if I was able to govern myself and we were able to govern ourselves, we would ultimately make a superior society than the society that's being propagated by the elites. There is no such thing as removing the elites or having some communist society where we're all friends. So it comes down to, you've got 98% of the population that basically just want to be slaves, but they want to be appreciated as slaves. And there's a big difference between people that go out and say, okay, I'm a slave and I'm going to be a slave, but I'm going to get something out of it. And people that don't have a choice to become slaves, but they are just forced upon them. Okay, there is a degree of slavery that is mutually beneficial to the master, right, and to the slave. When they turn around and they say, okay, you're working 140 days of a year as a peasant, your wife is free, your children are free, your land is free, you are able to live in exchange for the small work that you give the state. And if you are powerful and if you're a strong young man, you can engage within the state. If you have skills, then you can come and work in the state. Then you have an open door between what is a community and what is the state. And this is where a country is working at its best, where the empire and the individual have a relationship together that is mutually beneficial. But when they come and they say, okay, your wife, okay, needs to work in the factory, you need to work double, right? Your children need to get an education that fits in with slavery. And we're going to propagate slavery upon slavery upon slavery to the point that there is so much slavery that you can't even tell what you are anymore as a human being. We just rip you out from your roots, and we're going to deny your roots. Being English doesn't exist anymore, right? Being Native American, tough shit. We're the Spanish. Tough shit. We're going to kill and destroy all your temples. We're going to rip you out of your roots as a race, as an individual group, and we're just going to make you into serfs within the system. And then you just have these grieving slaves that you just have like everywhere on social media, that are constantly complaining about the elite, but have no such grit to be able to actually step in and even attempt to become an elite themselves. And we become so arrogant and individualistic that we won't even step aside when we see a strong man and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to work for you and that you're going to lead the battle charge, right? And I will be a slave under your banner because I know you're a noble lord and I know you're going to do good for us. This doesn't exist anymore, right? Because the lords and the power, much like Bernie Sanders talks about all the time, the elite, the billionaires, they're getting richer and richer and richer until a billionaire has his own system. A billionaire becomes a country upon himself. Elon Musk has more power than the United Kingdom. This is why you see Keir Starmer, going around. And Keir Starmer's gay, by the way. So is Emmanuel Macron. So is Trudeau. These are false leaders. And when I say gay, I literally mean they are homosexual. Keir Starmer was raped by Jimmy Savile, right? So the elite put these puppet heads forth that make them as feminine as possible, that make them as controlled as possible, so that therefore they can keep their paws over reality and they can hide the fact that they really are these nasty men that wish to control you. Because if we had a real dictator coming out and saying what he really believed, and okay, we're going to flood your country with immigrants, we're going to destroy your populace. If there was a politician that literally said those things, we would all start a revolution. But we don't, because we have someone like Keir or someone like Barack Obama that comes forth and is all nice and is all friendly and is all feminine. So we tend to think, okay, well, Keir, please say this, please say that. Maybe we should change the system. Maybe we should get in some more people. Maybe Angela Rayner should replace Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. So we end up in this political game that just goes around forever, the shifting of chairs. But in reality, the same force is governing from behind. War and violence and dominance is still the driving force. But the chess player, the violent warlord behind it, hides his power through the shadows of pieces. Beyond the veil, the same elite that ran Rome is still controlling us. The same elite which were the pharaohs of Egypt still control us, but they put up symbolic kings like King Charles in order to disguise their power. The United States is entering into an oligarchy, a total feudalistic takeover where a billionaire is coming in, much like Julius Caesar, one of these legends of Rome, and coming in and saying, you know what, I'm going to take control. It's a very Nietzschean will to power. I'm going to come in. We're not going to play around anymore. The president will call for violence. We're not going to do this nice little game like Obama. Oh, we love everyone. We want everyone to be equal, secretly while the US government is bombing people in the Middle East and killing children, phosphorus bombs and invasions of Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of these different countries. We now are going to have a president of the United States who is at least honest about the kind of violence that the state is committing, and at least steps forth and says, you know what, there are better forms of violence. Conquering Greenland is probably better for the United States than trying to conquer Ukraine. But we're going to come out and we're going to make the system more honest, more animalistic, more masculine, more real, and we're not going to pussyfoot around power anymore. We're going to be very, very honest about the power that drives society, which the Americans have always been incredibly honest about, because this is very raw. I'm a rich guy, I'm a powerful guy, you serve me, here's your salary. That works in the United States. Here in Europe, we do this very, very weak, system that doesn't respect the slave or respects the ruler. So what I'm saying is we are returning to more of a primal system, a system that could even be described as pre-Christian. Just to touch on Christianity here before I end this rant. In the same way that Luke Skywalker's father is Darth Vader, the god of war, right, the Dark Lord, Luke Skywalker, or Christ, is the second coming, right, of God. In that we have God that is this God that says competition, violence, war, domination. But then after that, we have something called love. We have something called empathy. We have something called consciousness, right, which is expanding, which doesn't see these borders, that doesn't see all these divisions, and just says, you know what, we all need to love each other and we all need to respect each other. And it doesn't matter if we're shooting at each other. We need to have some kind of level of respect where we won't spit on each other's graves. There is some kind of honesty in Christ, in that although we're going to be at war with each other, we have good faith for the enemy. And this Christ coming of energy, the second coming of Christ, is not this literal coming of Jesus in the flesh, although it might be. But first it comes within us, this feeling of love, this feeling of, you know what, we're going to look out for each other and we're going to elevate our consciousness despite the conditions that we're in. This is the key to freedom, not to deny the competition, not to deny God and to deny the harsh lines of reality, but accept them, and through accepting them, through transmutation, accept a higher principle, a principle that allows us to love, a system that allows us to enjoy, so that we're not just in this harsh game, right? At least we can smile through the suffering, at least through being crucified with the government, with populaces that seek to control us. We can at least die gloriously as a slave with some kind of connection to God that cannot be stolen. And that this connection that's inside of us, not outside of us, but inside of us, that has the ability to connect with an innate divinity, is the core of how we live a life that is enlightened. So don't deny the fact that we're living in a dark world driven by dark laws. Accept them and work within them. But understand that your goal is to take these building blocks and make a society that is ultimately more Christ-like. Your job is to take the baton and take it in the right direction and put it down. And sure, we're going from tyranny to tyranny, freedom to freedom, back and forth this loop. But our hope and our faith in Jesus Christ is that eventually it's going to go in the right direction. And that this is the ultimate faith in where we're going. But it's also the understanding that there's an apocalypse, there's dark forces at play, and that we have to battle those dark forces. And it's only by beating those dark forces within inside of us and outside of us that this whole capitalistic enslavement of other people will eventually have some kind of respect for the slave.